Vanessa Ross was on her knees, polishing the Italian marble floor of the Belmont estate in the Hamptons. The faint scent of lemon wax filled the vast entrance hall, mixing with the distant aroma of freshly brewed coffee coming from the chef's kitchen. Every sound echoed in the mansion, her cloth sliding against the tiles, the rhythmic creak of the grandfather clock, the faint gusts of wind rattling the tall windows. For 3 years, this routine had been her prison and her disguise. She moved with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned to be invisible in order to survive. To Andrew Belmont, her existence blended into the furniture, present, functional, and beneath notice. The sound of sharp heels clicking down the corridor snapped through the silence. It was Madison, Andrew's secretary, carrying a leather folder against her chest. Behind her, the heavy steps of Andrew himself descended the grand staircase. His presence filled the room before his voice did. The strong cologne of Tom Ford, the rustle of his tailored Armani suit, and the cold authority of a man used to commanding not just employees, but entire skylines. On the phone, his tone was clipped and arrogant. "I want every detail ready by Thursday," he barked, not sparing Vanessa even a glance. 200 guests, only the elite. This gala will set the tone for Belmont real estate's next decade. Vanessa kept scrubbing at a stubborn wine stain that had seeped into the marble during the last investor meeting. Her hands moved automatically, but inside her chest, her heartbeat hammered. She had learned to absorb humiliation in silence, to bow her head and let disdain roll over her like rain on glass. But that morning, when Andrew's gaze finally shifted toward her, something in the air shifted. He paused, ending the call abruptly, and for the first time in weeks, his full attention landed on the woman kneeling at his floor. "Vanessa," he said slowly, testing the name as if it were foreign to his lips. His voice carried a peculiar inflection, half amusement, half cruelty. She stood, wiping her palms against the worn blue apron tied around her waist. "Good morning, Mr. Belmont." His silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, before he spoke again. "We need to talk." He walked to the marble fireplace, staring up at an oil painting imported from Europe. His back remained to her, but his words sliced through the cavernous hall. "Thursday is our annual gala. As usual, you'll handle the final cleaning before the guests arrive." Vanessa nodded quietly, bracing for yet another impossible list of demands. But then he turned, a thin smirk on his face. "This year will be different." "This year, you will attend?" The rag in Vanessa's hand slipped, falling against the marble with a soft thud. Her pulse spiked, but she forced her face to remain neutral. "Attend, sir, as a guest." Her voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. Andrew circled her slowly, his hands clasped behind his back like a general inspecting a soldier. "You'll dress appropriately, dine at the main table, mingle with senators, bankers, and CEOs. You'll behave as though you belong in that world." His eyes narrowed, gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Because I want you to learn a lesson about knowing your place." Vanessa's throat tightened. She understood instantly. This wasn't kindness. It was a trap. Andrew Belmont wasn't inviting her to celebrate. He was inviting her to be ridiculed. He wanted to watch her falter in front of the city's elite, to expose her as a fraud. Every word dripped with condescension. "Don't worry if you don't know how to act," he added, lips curling. "I'm sure my guests will be very forgiving of your background." She pressed her lips together, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Her palms stung from the pressure of her clenched fists. In that moment, surrounded by walls of wealth she cleaned daily, but never truly touched, she made a silent vow. Andrew thought he knew who she was, just another desperate maid. But he had no idea. He didn't know about the past she'd buried, the name she had abandoned, or the empire she had once called her own. And he certainly didn't know that by inviting her into that ballroom, he had set the stage for his own downfall. Vanessa slipped into the private library after the morning orders scattered the staff across the Belmont estate. The room smelled of old paper and cedar polish, the kind of wealth that creaks when you walk. Sunlight poured through tall mullioned windows, cutting the dust into glittering columns. She ran a cloth across the glass coffee table, and a thin magazine sheet, once tucked inside an art book, fluttered to the floor. She crouched to pick it up, ready to slide it back where it belonged, until the headline froze her hand mid-air. Vanessa Ross at the Plaza, a night of philanthropy. The photo showed a younger her in a rose-colored silk gown, chin high, shoulders open, ringed by Wall Street donors and art patrons. For a moment she heard the click of the cameras again, the bartender's shaker, the polite laughter of people who once spoke her name with a tilt of admiration. She lowered into the leather club chair, with the article trembling between her fingers. How long had this been here? The caption named her father, Richard Ross, founder of Ross Industries, and talked about their textile innovations imported from North Carolina mills to Paris runways. Another paragraph, written like a dagger wrapped in velvet, recapped the collapse. A bet on emerging markets gone sour, leveraged notes that snapped like piano wires, a run of creditors, and then that winter when everything went suddenly, fearfully quiet. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Madison's voice came from the doorway, careful and dry, as if she were always allergic to emotion on the clock. Vanessa folded the sheet in half with the neatness of a habit she couldn't unlearn. "Just dust," she said, and smiled, the practiced, neutral smile of someone who knows survival often looks like silence. "Mr. Belmont wants the ballroom sightlines cleared," Madison continued, stepping in on cautious heels. "No service carts near the main entrance, and—" She stopped, noticing the sheen in Vanessa's eyes despite the steady face. "You okay?" Vanessa smoothed the page and slipped it into her apron pocket. "I will be." The secretary's gaze lingered for a fraction of a second. Curiosity, maybe pity, maybe recognition. But then she nodded and left the way she'd come, a metronome of clicks disappearing down the corridor. Alone again, Vanessa pressed the folded article to her chest, as if steadying a heartbeat that had just remembered how to run. Memories unspooled with the same merciless clarity as a market crash. Her father's desk light, burning at 2 a.m. Spreadsheets splayed like maps to a country that kept moving its borders. Her mother's voice, warm and exacting, teaching her which fork was for oysters and which silence was for power. Then the phone calls, the headlines, the humiliating parade of valuations, how easily society auctioned off dignity when it smelled blood. The funerals were winter cold and too quiet. Grief sat on her lungs like wet wool. Afterward, the city that once opened on a smile began to shut on a shrug. You learn quickly that some doors aren't locked. They're simply not held for you anymore. Vanessa breathed, slow and deliberate. Losing money had hurt. Losing the name had nearly erased her. She stood and faced the gilt mirror above the mantel. Her reflection wore a blue service apron and lemon wax smudges, but the posture she straightened into didn't belong to an employee. It belonged to a woman who had been educated to hold the room the way a conductor holds a downbeat. "He thinks I don't know where I belong," she whispered, and the library swallowed the words like a secret pact. The thought landed with the clean click of a chess piece. Andrew Belmont wanted a spectacle. Invite the maid, watch her drown under chandeliers, let laughter do what money occasionally can't, punish. It would be funny if humiliation weren't such a lazy currency. Humor tugged at one corner of her mouth anyway. If he wants theater, let's give him opening night. A discreet buzz sounded from the hallway intercom, deliveries for the gala. Vanessa replaced the art book precisely where she'd found it and tucked the article deeper into her pocket as if she were holstering truth. On the side table lay a stack of RSVP cards. Names she knew like old street corners: Robert Castleton, Texas Oil in a tux; Charles Montgomery, a smile sharp as an IPO; Senator William Turner and Margaret, Washington in pearls. Their signatures looked the same as they had when she shook their hands at the plaza. A cool, absurd calm filled her. Recognition is a door you can knock on from either side. Sometimes it opens simply because your knuckles remember the wood. Her phone, a cheap model with a hairline crack, vibrated in her apron. Unknown number. She let it go quiet, then checked the message. "Vanessa, this is Helen. Madison told me you might need something for Thursday. If it's you, come by the studio. No charge. H.M. Helen Marquette, Upper West Side legend. Seamstress to actresses, ambassadors, and the kind of debutantes whose names were verbs at charity committees." Vanessa exhaled a small, disbelieving laugh. "No charge?" she repeated, testing the words like a fabric's drape. Pride flickered. She'd refused help for 3 years out of habit and penance, but there's a difference between debt and grace. One collects interest, the other collects people. She slipped the phone away with a decision that felt like standing up inside her own life. On her way out, she passed the ballroom and paused where she would enter on Thursday night. The parquet floor held the phantom prints of waltzes and whispered deals. The chandeliers were dimmed to a patient glitter, as if saving their brilliance for an audience. She closed her eyes and pictured the first 3 steps: chin level, shoulders soft, breath low, the posture of a woman who is never surprised by her own excellence. "You don't walk to belong," she told the room softly. "You walk because you already do." Then she turned toward the staff exit, the folded magazine warm against her palm, and headed for the train that would take her to Helen's studio. The library door eased shut behind her with the gentle finality of a chapter ending at exactly the right page. The subway groaned out of the tunnel as Vanessa climbed the steps onto the Upper West Side, the late afternoon air crisp and carrying the buttery smell of a nearby bakery. Helen Marquette's studio occupied a narrow brownstone with a brass plaque and a bell that chimed like a glass being touched by a silver fork. Inside, the space felt like a secret cathedral devoted to cloth. Bolts of silk and taffeta rose in color columns, dress forms stood like quiet sentries, and a long oak table was dusted with chalk marks as delicate as constellations. "You took your time," Helen said from behind a curtain, her French accent softened by decades in Manhattan. She emerged in a navy smock, a tape measure looped around her neck like a stethoscope. For a heartbeat, she only looked, eyes traveling from Vanessa's inexpensive coat to the way she held herself, chin level, shoulders aligned. "Ah," Helen murmured, smiling. "There you are." Vanessa laughed under her breath. "I wasn't sure I'd still exist in your world." Helen waved a hand. "Nonsense. Some people take off a season, others take off 3 years. The thread is still the thread." She crossed the room with a briskness that brooked no argument. "You texted," Vanessa began, "but I can't." "Pay," Helen supplied, not unkindly. "You will repay me in the only currency that matters, exactness. You will wear what I make as it was meant to be worn. No apology in the shoulders, no shrinking in the spine. Deal?" The conditions landed not as charity but as discipline. Vanessa nodded, something like relief breaking through the practiced restraint. "Deal." Helen clicked on an extra lamp, bathing the studio in a warm halo. "Tell me about this gala." Vanessa sketched it in clean lines. Belmont Real Estate's annual event. Manhattan ballroom, senators and bankers, 200 pairs of eyes waiting for the first wrong step. She did not say the word trap, but Helen's mouth tightened, as if she'd tasted it. "Then we will make a dress that refuses to whisper," Helen said. She drew back another curtain to reveal a garment bag alone on a rack, like a painting under a veil. When she unzipped it, the room seemed to brighten. A red silk gown, bias cut to move like liquid, long sleeves in sheer organza embroidered with a geometry of fine gold thread, a neckline that drew the eye to the face rather than the body. Vanessa reached out, stopped her hand in mid-air, and then touched the fabric the way one touches a memory. "It's not loud," she said, surprised. "It's inevitable," Helen corrected. "There is a difference." On the platform, the first fitting felt like stepping into a version of herself she had misfiled. Helen worked with quiet ferocity. Pin, step back, assess, pin again. "Breathe here," she instructed, hand light at Vanessa's ribs. "Good. Now imagine the door opening and every person in the room thinking they own the air. Take it anyway." The mirror held a conversation Vanessa hadn't had in years. The red did not devour her. It clarified her. The sleeves whispered strength without armor. The line of the gown insisted on presence without pleading. "My mother used to say, 'Elegance is truth with good posture,'" Vanessa said, half to the glass, half to Helen. "Smart woman," Helen replied, eyes on the hem. From a velvet box on the work table, Helen lifted a strand of cultured pearls with a diamond clasp and a pair of small drop earrings that caught the light like held breath. "From my grandmother," she said simply. Vanessa flinched. "Helen, I can't." "You will," Helen cut in, gentler than her words. "Listen to me. Money buys costumes. Lineage lends costumes. Character makes clothes honest. These will not make you someone. They will remind you to be yourself." She fastened the clasp at Vanessa's nape. The pearls were cool against skin warmed by nerves, and for a moment Vanessa felt like a doorway had swung open inside her chest. They rehearsed more than the dress. Helen insisted on the walk, heel-toe across masking tape laid in a T-shape, pause at center, turn that acknowledged the room without seeking permission. They rehearsed the hands, how to accept a champagne flute without clinging, how to greet a senator whose eyes linger a fraction too long, how to put a man in his place using only the distance between a smile and silence. They even rehearsed the breath. 4 counts in for composure, 6 counts out for control. "You are not going to perform wealth," Helen said, adjusting the sleeve seam. "You are going to perform sovereignty." As dusk glazed the studio windows, the conversation turned. "He invited you to humiliate you," Helen said, not asking. Vanessa didn't look away. "Yes. And you will let him teach the room something else instead," Helen said. "That power without grace is a cheap suit." A quick, involuntary laugh flashed across Vanessa's face. "I've cleaned enough cheap suits to recognize them," she said, and the humor threaded through the tension, stitch by small stitch. Helen's gaze softened. "Promise me one thing. If anyone recognizes you, you will not apologize for the time you were away. We do not apologize for winter when spring arrives. We simply open the windows." When the final pins were traded for stitches, Helen zipped the garment bag and pressed it into Vanessa's hands along with the velvet box. "Tomorrow," Helen said, "you will not enter that room hoping to be welcomed. You will enter knowing you are a welcome." At the door, she added in a quieter voice, "And if the past shows up, let it sit in the front row. The present will do the talking." On the sidewalk, the night had gone clear and cold. Vanessa stood for a moment, the weight of silk and pearls strangely light against her palm. A bus hissed by, scattering steam. Somewhere, a saxophone bled a bright, lonely phrase. She began to walk, measuring the city in breaths, 4 in, 6 out, chest open, chin level. Tomorrow, the chandeliers would not be the brightest thing in the room. The black car door opened to a river of light. Midtown Manhattan throbbed beyond the velvet ropes. Taxis coughing up steam, cameras blinking like curious fireflies as guests funneled into the Belmont Real Estate Gala at the Metropolitan Club on Fifth Avenue. Inside, the ballroom breathed in gold, coffered ceilings, crystal chandeliers, a parquet floor buffed to a mirror. A string quartet tuned to a polite shimmer, while waiters ghosted past with silver trays and champagne flutes chiming a delicate hello. At the threshold, Vanessa paused, feeling the silk cool against her spine, the pearls a calm lunar weight at her throat. 4 counts in, 6 out. She did not look for permission. She crossed the boundary as if returning to a room she had designed. Conversation snagged mid-sentence, threads snapping in invisible hands. A hedge fund manager's laugh stalled and fell to the floor. A senator's wife lifted her glass but forgot to sip. The light found the red first, then the face, then the posture, chin level, shoulders soft, eyes that did not beg or bark but declared. The gown did not shout. It clarified her, like a pair of immaculate lenses brought to the correct prescription. Vanessa felt every gaze like weather, some warm with curiosity, some cool with appraisal, a few brittle with calculation. She did not flinch. Her heels kissed the parquet in measured syllables, a language of arrival. Behind her breastbone, the old orchestra struck up a theme she thought she had mislaid. It returned on cue. Recognition traveled across the room the way a fuse carries light. Robert Castleton turned from a knot of Texans, his eyes narrowing, then widening with a boyish astonishment, his tailored bravado usually kept under arrest. "I'll be damned," he whispered, not unkindly, his drawl softening into respect. Charles Montgomery stilled with his champagne at half-mast, the practiced smile slipping into something unguarded. Margaret Turner touched her pearls and leaned toward her husband, Senator William Turner, whose practiced neutrality flickered into human surprise. You could map the names by the movement, a jolt of shoulders, a hand to a mouth, a glass lowered with care, as if the room recognized a note it had been missing and was afraid to breathe lest it lose it again. She reached the mouth of the ballroom and paused, not to be admired, but to establish tempo. The quartet, by accident or providence, found a slower, deeper piece, and the chandeliers seemed to dim to a more attentive sparkle. A maitre d' approached with the proprietary glide of a man who knows the map of a night better than its host. "Ms." he began, politeness poised like a napkin. "Ross," Vanessa supplied gently, as if offering him the right key. "Vanessa Ross." He blinked once. There it was, the name fitting in his mind where a rumor had been, and then he bowed the smallest fraction deeper than required. "Welcome, Ms. Ross. May I show you to the main table?" He had not been instructed to do that. Rooms have a way of reassigning seating when presence is correctly worn. Andrew Belmont felt it before he saw it, the way a man on a boat feels a change in current he cannot yet name. Laughter around him thinned. The circle of executives shifted their attention to a point behind his shoulder. He turned with a smile lacquered onto his face and watched it slide off as if the finish had never dried. For a beat, he did not recognize her. Humiliation had trained him to anticipate awkwardness, not sovereignty. Then the knowledge hit him with a physical force, a chest-tightening click. Vanessa Ross. His hand forgot its choreography with the tumbler of scotch and hung stupidly in the air. "Good evening, Andrew," she said when the distance dwindled, her voice carrying like a bell, clear, unstrained, impossible to ignore. "Thank you for the invitation." Their silence had an audience. It was not the vulgar hush of spectacle, but the attentive quiet of a courtroom just before the verdict. Andrew recovered a fraction of his old form and executed a smile that rehearsals had taught him would pass for warmth. "Mrs. Ross," he said, then caught himself, recalibrated. "Vanessa." He extended his hand, and the pearls at her throat rose and fell once as she considered, then accepted, not as a supplicant, but as a peer-indulging protocol. Skin met skin with a neutrality that felt like indictment. Around them, the quartet continued, the bow on the cello digging a little deeper, as if the music, too, understood what was happening. A transfer of narrative custody. The first wave broke in the form of Robert Castleton, who approached with the speed of a man trying to beat his own reputation to a conclusion. "Miss Ross," he said, and the miss sounded like a restoration, not a demotion. "New York's been quieter without you." Vanessa smiled the way one does when receiving an old photograph, grateful, careful, unseduced by nostalgia. "Texas hasn't," she countered, and he laughed, chastened and charmed. Margaret Turner slipped in on the other side, her social radar finding the precise moment to turn a scene into a statement. "Vanessa, dear," she said, genuine warmth under the polished address. "You must sit near us." It was an invitation and a recorded vote. The room logged it. Andrew tried to regain hostly authority with logistics. "I believe you were, He glanced at the seating chart on a tablet held by a sweating junior coordinator. The original placement, back table, decorative exile, burned on the screen like a petty crime under a spotlight. The coordinator flicked and stammered, but the maitre d' had already moved, replacing a tent card at the main table with the discreet finality of a notary stamping a deed. The choice read as natural as gravity. Vanessa inclined her head to Andrew, an acknowledgement so perfectly calibrated it felt like mercy. "Shall we?" she said to no one in particular, and everyone that mattered. As they walked, the crowd didn't part so much as a line, spines straightening, eyes softening into attentive intelligence. Vanessa returned greetings in French to a cultural attaché, accepted a compliment about the gown with credit to Helen Marquette, and deflected a too-curious question with a small story about the plaza that revealed nothing except that she remembered the taste of its cocktails. She did not step on anyone's lines. She allowed them to find better ones. At the main table, a place setting now bore her name in calligraphy as if it had been scripted there all week. She took her chair with the economical grace of someone lowering herself into a decision she had already made. Across the room, Andrew lifted his glass and drank something that did nothing to moisten his suddenly dry mouth. The quartet resolved its phrase as the first course began its parade. Silver domes glinted. Conversation restarted with a new key and tempo, tuned to a center it hadn't anticipated but now accepted as obvious. Vanessa's posture didn't falter. Her breath stayed low and even. The pearls kept their lunar counsel. She had entered the room through the door he chose and turned it into a door she owned. Around the table, the arcs of curiosity bent toward respect. Then opportunity. The night had reset, and in the small pause before the soup spoons were lifted, you could feel the next movement forming, not applause, not scandal, recognition. The main table looked like a diplomatic summit disguised as dinner, senators paired with CEOs, an ambassador across from a Wall Street legend, and place cards written in calligraphy that turned names into crests. Vanessa felt the chair take her weight, like a promise kept. The first course, lobster bisque perfumed with cognac, arrived beneath a silver dome, and the steam rose in graceful curls that smelled like warmth learned in a cold world. To her right, Margaret Turner angled slightly, that practiced posture of power wrapped in civility. "I'm so glad you're here, Vanessa," she said, not whispering, because some sentiments are stronger when said in daylight. Across, Senator William Turner acknowledged with a nod that meant I listen more than I talk when the person across from me has something to say. Charles Montgomery lifted his spoon, studying her the way value investors study a chart, not for noise, but for signal. "You've been scarce," he said, voice smooth as a glass boardroom table. "New York rarely misplaces what it wants to keep." Vanessa tasted the bisque, let the heat settle, then answered with a small smile. "Sometimes the city stores you on a higher shelf than you can reach until you remember you own a ladder." The senator's mouth twitched, humor earned, not performed. Robert Castleton leaned in, Texas charm softened by genuine curiosity. Can't argue with that. Last I saw you was at the Plaza fundraiser, 6, 7 years back? 8, Vanessa said, without having to count. We raised for pediatric care. You matched the final pledge. Castleton blinked, not at the memory but at the precision. Guess I did. The second course arrived with choreography that would make a conductor nod. Tiny lemon quenelles, buttered asparagus, halibut that flaked under a fork like a page turning. Dr. Philippe Dubois, the French ambassador, addressed her in French first, out of instinct or test. Vanessa responded in the same language, the vowels travelling with ease, then slipped to English for the table. We were discussing Paris's new cultural grant structure. It rewards long arcs, not quick applause. Margaret's eyes warmed. Long arcs, she repeated, tasting the words as if they were a vintage. That's rare in politics and in markets. Charles tapped his glass once with his fingernail, a gentle gavel. And rarer still at dinner, he said. Most rooms are obsessed with this quarter. Vanessa's gaze stayed level. This quarter matters when you're sprinting. I'm rebuilding endurance. The talk turned, as it always does at tables that matter, to art and assets and where they overlap without admitting it. Charles mentioned a Rothko he'd acquired, or rescued, depending on who tells it. He added with a wryness that liked itself. Vanessa didn't posture. She asked about the underpainting, the meditative bands, how the colour field breathed in different lights. She wasn't performing sophistication. She was remembering a language she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Some collectors buy a Rothko, she said softly. Others sit with one. The difference sat with the table. Castleton chuckled into his napkin. You do this on purpose, don't you? He said. Turning nouns into verbs. Vanessa tilted her head. Verbs move things, she answered. Nouns sit still. The senator's laugh was brief, then thoughtful. Policy loves verbs. His face seemed to say, inevitably, the past approached, respectful but determined. Margaret set down her fork. If I may, she began, the phrase Washington uses before it says what it came to say. Ross Industries, it unraveled so quickly. Many of us wondered, how did you stand in that storm? Vanessa breathed in 6 counts, let the pearls cool her skin. We didn't stand, she said plainly. We were knocked down. Then we learned kneeling can either be despair or preparation. My father taught me markets. My mother taught me rooms. Both taught me to rise without asking for permission. Silence followed, the clean kind that makes a statement audible. Doctor. Dubois broke it with a simple, dignified "C'est bien dit," and raised his glass, the width of 2 fingers, nothing gaudy. Respect, offered and received. By the time the main course arrived, dry-aged filet with a marrow glaze, truffled potatoes, whispering luxury without shouting it, Vanessa had answered 3 questions by redirecting them, and asked 5 by listening. She engaged the senator on federal housing incentives as if she'd spent the morning with legislative analysts. She questioned Castleton on carbon capture credits, like someone who reads both the science and the footnotes. She spoke with Charles about modular construction and 3D printed components, with the calm of a person allergic to buzzwords and in love with logistics. None of it felt like show. It felt like use. Competence is quiet until a microphone appears, she thought. Tonight the room handed her one without knowing it had. Andrew Belmont watched from a distance that felt measured in more than feet. Every time her voice carried, something tightened and then let go inside him, like a knot remembering the instruction to loosen. He had planned on a spectacle that confirmed what he believed about ladders and ceilings. What he was getting was a masterclass on how ceilings are illusions taught by people who've never looked up. He tried to reassert hostly gravity by gesturing for a toast, but the moment belonged to the table now, the way good rooms assign leadership not by title, but by steadiness. The maitre d' refilled Vanessa's glass first, as if under orders from the narrative itself. Dessert came in a trio: dark chocolate torte with raspberry coulis, a lemon tart that tasted like light had learned a recipe, and a tiny crème brûlée whose surface crack yielded the satisfying sound of decisions made. Margaret turned to Vanessa with a smile that included consequence. "We hold a committee breakfast next week, education and workforce," she said. "I'd like you there." Charles added, almost as a reflex, "We're hosting a roundtable on sustainable development. Your view would be clarifying." Castleton, not to be outdone but also not playing a game he didn't respect, drawled, "And if you ever want to talk energy transition outside a panel, I've got a porch in Houston and a calendar that can be persuaded." The table laughed, offers disguised as casual remarks, polite fiction both parties were happy to sign. As coffee arrived, rounded, chocolatey, the kind that turns fatigue into focus, Vanessa felt something unclench that had nothing to do with the room and everything to do with the mirror in Helen's studio. She hadn't asked to be returned to her old orbit. She had insisted on a new axis. The past, seated politely at the edge of the table, nodded as if to say, "I see what you've done with the place." She set her cup down and caught Andrew's eye across the room. No triumph, no taunt, just a level look that translated to terms. He looked away first, not out of shame, not yet, but because some realizations require privacy before they can be worn in public. The orchestra shifted to something brighter as dinner dissolved into clusters of conversation. Waiters threaded through with petits fours and fresh champagne, and the room's energy took on that post-main course confidence. Deals warming up, names exchanging hands like business cards shaped as smiles. Vanessa moved through it without hurry. Accepting greetings she didn't chase, letting people decide for themselves whether they were making small talk or registering a shift in weather. Charles Montgomery found her first near a pair of tall windows looking over Fifth Avenue. "We're gathering a group Tuesday, real estate, infrastructure, green bonds," he said, voice pitched for inclusion, not pressure. "No panels, just people who can do math and keep their egos in their pockets." He lifted an eyebrow. "You in?" Vanessa weighed the offer as if it were a tool, not a trophy. "Send the deck," she said. "I'll bring questions." Margaret Turner arrived with the easy authority of someone who can get 3 senators to share a pastry and a policy. "Breakfast at Russell next week," she said, meaning the Senate office building without having to name it. "Education and workforce. We're building a bipartisan pilot around apprenticeships, credentialed, portable, measurable." She let a beat pass, then added, "Rooms like this talk about opportunity. That room allocates it." Vanessa heard the invitation under the invitation: show up as someone whose competence won't be used as decoration. "If I speak," she said, "I'll ask for the microphone before the photos." Margaret smiled like a teacher whose student had just circled the right answer without being told it was on the test. "That's the only way the room is worth your time." Robert Castleton didn't bother with the velvet. His style was leather and dust, and a grin that made people think he'd lend them a truck or $1 billion, depending on what the day required. "I'll cut straight," he said, steering her toward a quieter alcove where a palm screened eavesdroppers. "We're moving a chunk of portfolio into transition, carbon capture, hydrogen, grid hardening. I've got operators who can drill a hole through a mountain and accountants who can make the mountain say thank you, but I don't have enough people who can talk both languages without condescending to either camp. You want to have that porch talk I threatened you with." Vanessa didn't flinch at the size of the chessboard. "If I sit on that porch," she said, "we'll talk unit economics, not Instagram. And we'll talk how the benefits land on people whose lights flicker first in a storm." Castleton's grin grew. "Ma'am, I hate Instagram. Bring your ladder." Through it all, Andrew Belmont orbited at a distance, as if gravity had turned choppy and he wasn't sure how to steer. He finally intercepted her near the coat check, under a painting of a harbour where ships were either arriving or leaving, depending on your optimism. "I owe you." context," he began, the words like dry bread. "For the invitation." Vanessa let him hear the silence. It made the air honest. "I wanted to make a point," he tried again. About knowing my place," she finished, not cruelly, just precisely. He exhaled, some performance dying in his chest. "Yes." He looked tired of himself. "And then you walked in, and the room told me mine." He paused long enough to mean it. "I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I'd be a bigger fool than I've already proven to be if I didn't ask you to consider consulting, not as this." He gestured vaguely toward the staff hallway. "As what you are." Vanessa studied him the way she had studied balance sheets. "Not for lines, for patterns. Consulting can mean a photo op," she said. "I don't do those." He nodded once, almost grateful for the rebuke. "Terms." She let the word sit, then gave it shape. 7 days, full access to financials for the last 5 years, freedom to meet your department heads without you in the room, authority to call 3 external conversations with potential partners, my Rolodex, not your PR. No retaliation against anyone who tells me inconvenient truths. At the end, I deliver a diagnostic, a plan, and 3 quick wins you can bank inside 30 days. She inclined her head a fraction. During those 7 days, I don't polish your floors or pour your coffee. Color rose in his face, not shame alone. Recognition. "Deal," he said, the word carrying both relief and fear. "One condition," she added. "If I decide you want to shine more than a shift, I walk." He swallowed. "Fair." She stepped away for a breath and found herself in the ladies' lounge, where a gilded mirror caught the light just so, turning faces into paintings and moments into verdicts. The room was quiet enough to hear the constant city just beyond the glass. Horns, heels, the faint thrum of lives that didn't care about chandeliers. She met her own eyes, not to admire, not to rehearse, but to confirm. "I am not here for a return. I am here for a rebuild." Helen's voice came back to her, like a seam you can't see but you trust. "You are not going to perform wealth. You are going to perform sovereignty." Vanessa let her shoulders relax the exact millimeter that made the posture sustainable. Control isn't a glare, it's a breath you remember to take. Back in the ballroom, the night tilted toward departures. Coats reappeared. Farewells were exchanged with the choreography of people who would meet again in rooms with different carpets. Dr. Dubois took her hand in both of his. "Vous avez remis les pendules à l'heure," he said. "You set the clocks right." And then, in English, "Not everyone notices when that happens. The ones who matter did." Margaret squeezed Vanessa's elbow with conspiratorial affection. "Tuesday?" she said. Charles gave a nod that in his dialect meant "I'll send the deck before midnight." Castleton tipped 2 fingers from his temple. "We'll try not to scare the porch," he said, and left it at that. Andrew waited by the door, not blocking it, just present. "The car is yours," he offered, managing not to ruin the gesture by over-explaining it. Vanessa considered, then accepted, efficiency, not dependency. In the quiet of the back seat, the city's lights slid across the black glass like a river taking notes. Andrew finally said, "I was sure I knew how tonight would feel." He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I didn't account for the variable of you." She looked out at a deli closing up, a teenager skateboarding past a doorman's glare, a florist hauling buckets inside. "Variables exist," she said. "Systems that pretend they don't tend to fail." He nodded, absorbing it like a formula he intended to memorize and maybe, for once, understand. At the Belmont estate, the grand hall was still, the marble floor, a moonlit lake. Vanessa stood where she had knelt that morning, the echo of the day folding in on itself. She set the garment bag on a chair and touched the pearls, the clasp cool against skin. Andrew stopped a respectful distance away. "Tomorrow?" he asked, meaning the 7 days. "9 p.m., she said. "I'll need the CFO at 10, department heads after lunch. Send me the org chart and the last 2 board decks before dawn." He gave the ghost of a smile. "You assume I'll be up?" "I assume you'll be different," she replied. "Start with a wake." The smallest laugh escaped him, an unused muscle remembering function. "Good night, Vanessa." "Good night, Andrew." He turned toward the corridor, she toward the stair that led to the small room she had made livable with plants and discipline. The house settled, as if bracing for renovation. In her room, she laid the pearls in their box and the dress across the back of a chair where moonlight could prove that red is a spectrum, not a shout. She opened a cheap notebook, the one with a bent spiral, and wrote 3 headings in a hand that preferred order to ornament. Diagnosis, design, deliver. Under diagnosis, she listed revenue flat 3 years, lost bids to modular competitors, cash parked in timid instruments, over-reliance on legacy suppliers, PR over practice. Under design, sustainability baked into margins, partnerships, not panels, apprenticeships with measurable lift, community equity in projects, risk modeled like weather, not fantasy. Under deliver, 3 contracts recoverable in 30 days, 2 efficiency gains, 1 culture change provable by behavior, not memos. She capped the pen with the quiet click of a woman who has decided to be the cause, not the effect. Hook para o próximo tópico. Amanhece o dia 1/7. Acesso total aos números, conversas sem filtro com a equipe, telefonemas que reabrem portas fechadas e os primeiros quick wins aparecendo onde ninguém olhava. Posso seguir para o tópico 7. The 7-day trial, day 1, diagnosis without perfume. By 9, the conference room at the Belmont estate had been turned into a war room, blinds half-drawn, legal pads in neat stacks, a carafe of coffee strong enough to file a complaint. Vanessa stood at the head of the table with a whiteboard marker like a conductor's baton. Martha Klein, the CFO, arrived with a laptop and a careful expression that said she had seen consultants come and go like weather. 5-year financials, line item detail, vendor terms, cash positions, Vanessa said, skipping pleasantries. Respect here meant not wasting anyone's morning. They dove in, revenues, flat 3 years, bids, lost to firms using modular methods with shorter timelines. Cash, 6.2 MITs, sitting timid in low-yield instruments, PR budget larger than R&D by a factor that made silence the only polite response. We parked cash for stability, Martha offered. You parked potential sachet, Vanessa answered, not cruelly, precisely. She drew 3 boxes on the board. Leak, lull, leverage. By noon, every dollar had a box. By 1, the narrative had a spine. Day 1, afternoon, hearing the floorboards talk. Department heads filed in after lunch, some bristling, some curious, all evaluating whether this would be another parade of buzzwords. Vanessa began by disarming the room. I'm not here to grade, she said. I'm here to measure. Different sport. Ethan Cho, engineering, admitted, after a pause, that his team still spec'd methods that worked great in 2015. Priya Nair, procurement, confessed vendor lock-in. We renew because we know their headaches. Diana Lopez, community partnerships, said the quiet part. We enter neighborhoods with a ribbon and a timeline, not with a conversation. Vanessa didn't punish. She translated. Old methods cost time. Old vendors cost leverage. Old intros cost trust. She listed 3 quick experiments for the next 30 days, each owned by a name, not a memo. People left not flattered, not scolded, activated. Behind activation, the first quiet loyalty formed. Day 2, maps and mirrors. Martha returned with board decks and a spreadsheet color-coded within an inch of its life. Vanessa traced patterns, bids lost at the same 2 milestones, permitting and prefab lead time, a PR surge whenever operations slipped, and a hiring freeze that preserved margins while starving innovation. "You were playing not to lose," Vanessa said, capping her pen. Andrew, who had been standing by the window like a chastened headmaster, answered honestly for once. "I was," he said. "Fear is expensive," she replied. "And unitemized." Then she asked for 3 calls. Aisha Rahman, CEO of Motor City Modular in Detroit, Luis Martinez, a developer in Mexico City, and Dean Alvarez of Hudson County Community College. "We're going to borrow velocity, open a door south, and grow our own talent," she said, in that order. Day 3, the phone that reopens rooms. They took the first call on speaker. "Aisha," Vanessa began, voice warm, tempo brisk. "Your team shaved 8 weeks off a Newark mid-rise last year by pre-panelizing bathrooms and stairs. We lost a bid across the river for that exact reason. Partner with us on 2 pilots. We bring sites and financing. You bring method and a 4-person who can train our crews without condescension." Aisha chuckled, a sound like knuckles tapping a sturdy table. "I like people who do homework," she said. "Send your PM. We'll walk the plant on Friday." Next call, Luis Martinez. "We have a municipal proposal in CDMX," he said, "stalled on risk." Vanessa translated policy to cash flow and back again, sketching a PPP with phased guarantees and carbon credit upside. Luis paused. "It's like you never left the room," he said. "Fly down or I fly up." "Meet in Houston," Vanessa answered, thinking of Castleton's porch. 2 birds. One state. The third call, to Dean Alvarez, carried a different gravity. "I want a paid apprenticeship pipeline," Vanessa said. "Credentialed, portable, measurable, 15 seats to start, veterans prioritized, bilingual support. We present it next week at Russell with Senator Turner." The dean didn't need convincing. He needed respect. "If your people show up," he said, "we will too." "We'll show up," Vanessa promised, and meant it. Day 4, walking the plant, walking the talk. Friday at Motor City Modular smelled like sawdust and problem-solving. Aisha led them past assembly lines where bathrooms slid along rails like finished sentences and stairwells waited for buildings to remember they needed spines. Ethan asked tactical questions, fasteners, tolerances, crane time. Aisha answered in numbers and scars. "We don't fake savings," she said. "We bank them." Vanessa negotiated like a builder and a banker at once. Revenue share, training embedded, a 90-day pilot clause with teeth. At lunch, chili, cornbread, no preciousness. Aisha looked at Andrew over the rim of her mug. "She's not a consultant," she said, tilting her head toward Vanessa. "She's a foreman with a fountain pen." Andrew laughed, surprised at how good humility felt when it wasn't performative. Back in New York, Martha initiated the first cash redeployment, moving $4 million from underperforming paper into a CapEx line for engineering modernization. "If we're going to move fast," she said, "we need tools that don't creak." Vanessa nodded. "Tools and trust," she said. "One buys the other." Day 5. Community isn't a ribbon. Diana led Vanessa and Andrew down a block in Jersey City, where Belmont held a contentious infill site, graffiti that said, "No more gloss," on the fence. A bodega keeper who had watched 3 groundbreakings become 3 weeds. Vanessa asked him his name. "Raphael," he said, skeptical by policy and by experience. "If we hire 10, Vanessa asked, "how many live within 6 blocks?" 4, he answered without looking at the street. He knew. Apprenticeships, childcare, stipends, a liaison who speaks Spanish and English, Vanessa said, counting on her fingers like building something you could see. and a community fund seeded with a % of savings from modular methods. We'll put the formula on a poster. Numbers, not slogans. Raphael's eyes narrowed, less hostile, more interested. You come back, he asked, or you send a ribbon. We come back, Vanessa said. She wrote her cell on a receipt. Text when the fence breaks. On the ride back, Andrew stared at the city as if it were a mirror with better advice. You routed around my habits, he said. I routed around your fear, Vanessa answered. The habits will follow. Day 6, decks, data, decisions. Weekend or not, the war room hummed. Vanessa stitched the week into a story the board and the Senate would understand. 3 quick wins. 1. Recover the lost Hudson bid by proposing a modular phase that saved 8 weeks and 4.7% on cost. 2. Free form matters for engineering upgrades, targeting crane time and sequencing to shave 12% off schedule variance. 3. Lock a signed LOI with Hudson County CC for a 15-seat apprenticeship, veterans first, bilingual, with placement guarantees. She paired each win with a metric and a face. Ethan's crew lead, who'd been waiting for new tools. Raphael, who wanted a job for his nephew. Aisha's foreman, who measured success in days, not decks. Martha reviewed the numbers and, for the first time in 3 years of attrition by caution, allowed herself the treason of optimism. We can brief the board Monday, she said, and brief them like grown-ups. Vanessa replied, no confetti, no fog. Day 7. Terms become behavior. Monday dawned with a room that smelled like strong coffee and new resolve. The board filed in with the polite skepticism of people allergic to magic but hungry for math. Vanessa presented like a builder lays out tools, one by one, each with a reason to exist. She didn't sell disruption, she sold sequence. Diagnose, design, deliver. She showed the cash move as a ladder, not a leap. The modular pilot as a reversible valve, not a cult. The apprenticeship as a pipeline with accountability baked in. Questions came, risk, supply chain, backlash, and she answered with if, then branches instead of adjectives. When she finished, no one applauded. It wasn't that kind of room, but chairs scraped back with the sound of people standing for something they intended to keep. In the hallway, Andrew stopped her. His voice had lost the lacquer and found a grain. 7 days ago, I invited a spectacle, he said. Today, I'm asking for a partner. Vanessa held his gaze, weighing not just the offer, but the man behind it. Partnership isn't a speech, she said. It's behavior repeated. He nodded. Then let's repeat it. The boardroom's glass walls held the late-morning city like a living chart. Traffic pulsing, cranes nodding, sunlight turning office glass into measured fire. A tray of coffee cooled between stacks of printouts. The whiteboard still bore Vanessa's 3 verbs: diagnose, design, deliver. Andrew stood by the window, jacket off, the posture of a man who had finally decided to carry something properly instead of pretending it wasn't heavy. I don't want a consultant, he said, voice steady, unvarnished. I want a partner. Vanessa didn't move to fill the silence. She let the word define itself in the room. Partnership is not a word printed on letterhead, she replied. It is behavior repeated under pressure. He nodded, accepting the terms as if they were gravity. Then let's write down the pressure. They sat, not across like opponents, but at a corner like builders sketching a foundation. Vanessa slid a 1-page term sheet across. Belmont Ross Development, working name, equal voting rights, profit participation tied to verifiable outcomes, reinvestment thresholds that protected long arcs from quarterly panic, a community equity clause earmarked a small, fixed percentage of cost savings from modular methods into neighborhood funds with public dashboards. A talent pipeline covenant bound them to maintain paid apprenticeships with portable credentials, 15 seats to start, growth keyed to project volume. "This protects purpose from becoming a speech," Vanessa said. Andrew read, pausing at the parts that pinched his old reflexes. "I can live with all of this," he said, surprising himself. "Good," she answered, "because the next page is culture." The culture page had fewer numbers and more verbs. No retaliation for bad news, facts before adjectives, win in rooms you don't control. Translate up, down, and out. The last line was a command, not a slogan. Leaders go first. Andrew exhaled like he'd been handed a tool he'd never learned to use. "Going first means I apologize, publicly," he said. "Not for the optics, for the harm." Vanessa held his gaze. "You won't lose leadership for apologizing," she said. "You'll begin it." Martha, the CFO, slipped in with a folder at that moment, timing that felt designed by a playwright with a sense of humor. Andrew looked at her, not over her. "Martha, I owe you and your team an apology for creating a culture where caution felt like safety," he said. "It cost us velocity and made your job harder." Martha blinked, then squared her shoulders as if someone had finally put the floor under her feet. "Apology accepted," she said. "Let's buy velocity on purpose." Downstairs, in the engineering bay that had been upgraded in line items but not yet in spirit, Vanessa and Andrew stood shoulder to shoulder while Ethan Cho ran a demo of the new sequencing software. Crane time collapsed on the screen like a well-planned tent. "We've been waiting on this," Ethan said, half amazed, half suspicious of the other shoe. "We've also been waiting on permission." Andrew cleared his throat. "You had it," he began, then caught himself. "You have it now," he corrected. Vanessa stepped in with the handoff. "Only a working partnership can make look easy." "Pilot starts Tuesday," she said. "2 crews, 1 from our side, 1 from Motor City Modular, rotated together. Document lessons in video and in writing. We pay overtime for training. No heroics, no shortcuts." Ethan nodded, relief and responsibility shaking hands in his eyes. "Copy," he said. "We'll make it boring in the good way." Mid-afternoon, a text slid onto Vanessa's screen from a number saved as Rafael Bodega. "Fence panel down. Teenagers cutting through. Can someone fix before dark?" She turned the phone so Andrew could read it. "This is what accountability looks like," she said. "It rings." He didn't deflect it to a subordinate. "Diana," he called into the hall, and when she appeared, he didn't issue a vague directive. "Contractor at Jersey City site. Emergency fix of perimeter," then set a weekly walk with Raphael and 2 other shop owners to review progress and hiring. "If we miss a week, I miss a meeting to make it up." Diana's eyebrows rose, surprise-wearing respect's jacket. "On it," she said. Vanessa tucked the phone away, the smallest smile tapping at the corner of her mouth. Leaders Go First had just met pavement. At dusk, they drafted the announcement. No confetti, no heroic stock photos. A simple note to staff and partners, Belmont Ross Development to pilot modular methods with Motor City Modular. Reinvest measured savings into local funds. Launch paid apprenticeships with Hudson County Community College. And pursue cross-border sustainable housing with Luis Martinez. At the end, a paragraph from Andrew, an apology without spin, a statement of what would be done differently, and a line that would become a kind of oath inside the company. "We will count the people impacted with the same seriousness that we count the dollars earned." Vanessa signed beneath with 3 sentences that sounded like architecture. "We will diagnose before we dramatize. We will design with the end user in the room. We will deliver in days and in dignity." Martha hit send. The building seemed to breathe out. "Word travels." Charles Montgomery replied to the memo with a calendar invite labeled simply "Green Bonds, serious people only." Margaret Turner forwarded it to her staff with the note, "Book M's. Ross for 10 minutes at the mic, after the photos, before the votes." Robert Castleton texted a photo of a weathered porch swing at sunset. "Houston's ready when you are." In the flurry, Andrew's phone buzzed with a different kind of message. From Madison, his secretary. For what it's worth, it feels different today. The staff noticed. He stared at it longer than the words required. Feels different is what cultures say before the metrics agree. He showed the text to Vanessa. She didn't crow. Day 1 of repeating the behavior, she said. 600 more to make it muscle memory. Night wrapped the Belmont estate in a clean dark. In the private library where this pivot had begun, Vanessa stood before the gilt mirror again, not to check the line of a dress now, but the line of a decision. The pearls lay in their velvet box on the desk, moon pale. She touched the clasp with a gratitude that didn't need witnesses. The apron she had folded so neatly for 3 years sat on the chair back. She didn't throw it away. She retired it, folded with the care due to tools that did their job. Andrew stepped into the doorway, not entering the room until invited, an instinct new enough that it still required attention. The lawyer will have the partnership doc by morning, he said. We can sign at noon. Vanessa looked from the mirror to the skyline outside. Noon works, she said. Bring a pen that writes through carbon copies. He smiled, a real one, quick and unadorned. I'll bring 2. The next day, when the pens moved, the signatures felt less like decoration and more like load-bearing beams. Cameras were absent, witnesses were present. Martha with her careful ledger eyes, Ethan with a foreman's pride, Diana with a neighborhood's texts in her pocket. A courier arrived while the ink dried, Aisha's countersigned training schedule and a first cut of assembly windows. Dean Alvarez's draft MOU with credential language bolded. Luis Martinez's proposed agenda for Houston, porch at 6 p.m., steak at 7, numbers at 8. Vanessa gathered the papers and stacked them in a neat order that read like a product roadmap. Now the work, she said, not to the room, but to herself, the way marathoners speak to mile markers. Andrew slipped his copy into a folder he'd labeled in his own hand, Prosperity. Now the work, he echoed. 6 months later, the city's skyline carried a few new lines that belonged partly to Vanessa's pen. Morning light turned glass towers into ribbons, while jackhammers kept time like metronomes of intent. Inside Belmont Ross's new office near Bryant Park, the walls smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition. Whiteboards showed schedules that no longer slipped. Dashboards tracked not just cost and days saved, but apprenticeship seats filled and community funds disbursed. Houston tomorrow, CDMX next week, Martha reported, tapping a tablet where Aisha's modular windows slid across timelines like well-oiled drawers. Ethan stood at her shoulder with a foreman's grin. Crane time's down 12%, he said. We didn't shave corners. We shaved chaos. Andrew listened with a posture that had learned the difference between owning a room and serving it. Good, he said simply, then glanced toward Vanessa. She nodded once. A conductor satisfied the section had found its cue. At lunch, they walked a humid Jersey City block where the contentious infill site had become a tidy choreography of deliveries and discipline. The fence was intact. The graffiti had been replaced by a poster that displayed, in large, legible numbers, the formula Community Fund, %% of modular savings, updated weekly. Raphael leaned in his bodega doorway like a newly appointed mayor of 6 blocks. My nephew starts the apprenticeship Monday, he said, half pride, half warning. If they treat him like a mascot, I'll text. Vanessa smiled. Text anyway, she answered. Leaders go first. Liaisons go fast. Andrew stepped forward before anyone prompted him. You'll hear from me if we miss a week, he told Raphael. And if I miss, she'll cancel my meeting, he added, tilting his head toward Vanessa. Raphael's laugh came out like a gavel. Deal. That evening, Greenwood Cemetery and Brooklyn traded heat for a breeze that moved the trees in patient conversations. Vanessa placed white roses on two stones, whose names only she spoke aloud, Richard Ross and Evelyn Ross. The marble was cool under her fingers. The city hummed beyond the gates like a far-off ocean. "We didn't rebuild Ross Industries," she said softly, "but we rebuilt what it taught me to love, work that matters to people who don't show up in quarterly decks." Andrew stood a respectful distance away, jacket over his arm, not filling the quiet with apologies that no longer needed rehearsal. "They would be proud," he said. "I am learning the difference between being rich and being useful." Vanessa's smile tilted. "Prosperous," she said. "Useful is the path, prosperous is the outcome." Back in Midtown, the Waldorf Astoria buzzed under crystal and expectation. The Business Leadership Foundation had gathered donors, senators, and more cameras than either of them liked for its annual awards. Vanessa's gown tonight wasn't red. Helen Marquette had made a midnight blue column with cap sleeves and a clean, unargumentative line. "You don't need a trumpet every night," Helen had said at the fitting. "Sometimes a violin wins the room." In the green room, Margaret Turner squeezed Vanessa's hands. "You'll have the mic for 11 minutes, she said. "The room thinks it wants a victory lap. Give it a blueprint." Vanessa stepped onto the stage to an applause that felt less like spectacle and more like acknowledgement. She told the story without violins, diagnosing leaks and lulls, designing ladders instead of leaps, delivering days and dignity in the same sentence. She closed with a promise written for anyone who had ever cleaned a floor and dreamed in blueprints. "We will count the people impacted with the same seriousness that we count the dollars earned." The standing ovation rose slowly, like people deciding to stand for themselves. After the ceremony, at a corner table away from the flash, Charles Montgomery raised a glass. "Green Bond's meeting went dangerously well," he deadpanned. "Two funds asked for more math. I promised them more English." Dr. Dubois bowed like an old movie. "Paris awaits your apprenticeship's model," he said. Robert Castleton arrived later than everyone, sunburned from a porch and smelling faintly of mesquite smoke. "Houston liked your questions," he told Vanessa. "Didn't like being asked to earmark community funds. We did it anyway." His grin was all porch light. "Bring your ladder next time. We've got a higher shelf." Andrew listened, then did something he wouldn't have imagined a year ago. He excused himself to call Diana and ask how Raphael's nephew's first day went. When he returned, he didn't announce the call. He just sat down different, like a man who'd decided muscle memory was worth the soreness. On Monday, Forbes hit stands with a cover line that had the internet splitting hairs and learning definitions. The rebuild of Vanessa Ross, from vanished heiress to builder of useful prosperity. The photo wasn't staged under chandeliers. It was shot at a CDMX site visit. Vanessa in a hard hat, boots dusty, laughing at something Luis Martinez had just said about policy that remembered people. Madison carried the magazine into the office like a gift and a receipt. "The staff is buying extra copies," she said, "mostly to show their mothers." Vanessa laughed, then pointed to the whiteboard where a new column had appeared, "Errors to keep." Madison read the first entry, saying, "I don't know, before we'll circle back." "We had 3 of those this month," Madison said. "They felt expensive and honest." "Expensive now, cheap later," Vanessa answered. "Honest now, trusted later." That afternoon a knock came at Vanessa's office door, hesitant but hopeful. A young woman stepped in, hair pulled back, resume clutched like a passport, voice steady despite the tremor in her wrist. "Miss Ross, my name is Sophia," she said. "I watched your speech at the Waldorf twice. I lost my family's restaurant during the pandemic. I'm working nights, taking classes days. I don't have the right ladder yet." Vanessa saw every year of her last 3 in the set of the girl's shoulders. "Sit," she said, and the chair received Sophia like a promise kept. They spoke about blueprints and bills, grit and grace, and the way survival teaches skills comfort never bothers to. When they were done, Vanessa slid a card across the desk. "Apprenticeships meet Wednesday," she said. "If you show up on time twice, you'll be early forever." Sophia gave a startled laugh that turned into relief. "I can do that." "Good," Vanessa said. "Then you can do the rest." That night, when the office emptied and the city changed keys, Vanessa stood alone by the window. On her desk lay 3 objects: the velvet box of pearls from Helen, the folded magazine clipping rescued months ago from Andrew's library, and a cheap notebook with the words "Diagnose," "Design," "Deliver," worn into the cover by her hand. She lifted the pearls once, not to wear, but to thank. The clipping went back into the drawer, a relic honored and retired. The notebook stayed open. Andrew knocked on the doorframe and waited for her nod. "We signed 2 contracts today," he said, "and I apologize to a foreman for ignoring a safety report last year." Vanessa closed the notebook and turned. How did it feel? He thought, then smiled to himself. "Like breath I forgot I had." She turned back to the window. "Keep breathing," she said. "Tomorrow we teach a room in Washington how to count people." He nodded. "And Houston how to count wind the right way. And CDMX how to count time with trust," she added. The city answered with lights. In the glass's reflection, the woman wearing midnight blue didn't look like a guest at someone else's table anymore. She looked like the person who chose where the table went and who got a seat, someone who understood that ladders are built, not found, that rooms can be taught, that prosperity is a verb, not a vault. The past, seated politely in the front row, nodded. The present, busy and measured, kept working. And the future, well, the future had already RSVP'd.